Once filled with promises, the collapse of a relationship turns into one of Kano's most shocking nights of violence. This is a story of a stranger whose desires turned to obsession, leading to a deadly revenge. And when the final gavel fell, the decision would send shockwaves through the city and beyond. But was justice truly served? Or did the story leave behind questions bigger than the verdict itself? In the end, this is not just a crime story. It is a human story of love turned toxic, of cultures colliding, and of justice struggling to speak in the face of loss. Every city has strangers who arrive with dreams, and in Kano, one such stranger was Frank Geng-quanrong. Born and raised in China, he grew up far from the dust and bustle of northern Nigeria. But like many of his countrymen, he became part of China's business expansion across Africa. His work with a textile-related firm brought him to Kano State, a thriving hub of trade and culture. In his mid-40s, Frank was not just a tourist, but a man seeking purpose in a land far from home. He lived quietly in the railway quarters of Kano, known by locals as the Chinese man who blended into the neighborhood. Accounts describe him as serious, private, hardworking, but also someone who longed for companionship in a place where he had no family ties. For Frank, Kano was supposed to be a place of work and survival, but fate had other plans. Because in the middle of this vibrant city, he would meet a young woman whose light would both brighten and darken his life, and it was in her world that his story would take a deadly turn. On the other hand, in Jambulo quarters of Kano, there lived a daughter who brought smiles to her family. Her name was Omita. At just 22 years old, she was the pride of her family, a modern, educated, and lively young woman with ambitions that stretched beyond the walls of her home. It was said that she was social, active on social media, and admired by her peers for her beauty and confidence. Her family was also well respected in the area, and she was known to be warm-hearted yet strong-willed. It was this combination of charm and determination that caught the attention of Frank. Their paths crossed, and despite their differences in age, culture, religion, and nationality, they formed a relationship that grew more serious than many around them expected. Reports say that Frank was taken by her, that he professed conversion to Islam, trying to prove his devotion. For a time, they were close, but as months passed, cracks began to show. Omita's youth meant that she had her own dreams and choices, while Frank, older and more possessive, began to struggle with letting go. Slowly, love twisted into obsession. It was the night of blood and screams in the quiet street of Jambulo. At 9 to 10 p.m. 16th of September 2022, Frank arrived at Omita's family home. Witnesses said that he was not invited, but then he forced his way inside the apartment after persistent knocking. Slipping past her mother at the doorway, he went straight for Omita's room. And within moments, neighbors and relatives heard chilling screams. Rushing inside, they found the unthinkable. Omita had been stabbed multiple times. Chaos erupted as her family carried her out, rushing her to the Murtala Mohammed Specialist Hospital. And doctors confirmed what her mother had feared. She was gone. Just hours later, newspaper and social media carried the headline, "Chinese man kills Nigerian lover in Kano." Outrage exploded online. To her family, she was a daughter and sister ripped from life. To the police, she was now a victim in a homicide case, and Frank was the prime suspect. He was quickly arrested and charged with culpable homicide, punishable by death under Kano's penal code. The case was set to test not just the limits of justice, but the fragile bridge between love and violence. Every trial is a battle between two stories, and in the Kano State High Court, where Frank stood trial for Omita's murder, those stories clashed head-on. It became a courtroom of grief and battle. The prosecution argued simply that Frank forced his way into a house and deliberately stabbed Omita to death. They brought 6 witnesses, 4 exhibits, including medical confirmation of her death and testimony from those who rushed to the scene. The defense, however, painted another picture. Frank himself testified, insisting that he had acted in self-defense, claiming a struggle had led to the stabbing. His lawyers tendered 5 exhibits trying to sow doubt about his intent. But prosecutors countered that the evidence, his uninvited entry, the multiple stab wounds, and his inconsistent testimony proved intention and not accident. Further reports had it that Frank claimed that he had spent 60 million naira on Umita, that is about $134,000 as at the time. And then she rejected his advances for marriage, which led to the unfortunate outcome. Now, day after day, the courtroom filled with the quiet presence of Umita's family, mourning in silence but determined to seek justice. Each session was covered widely in Nigerian media, with the public watching closely. This was no ordinary case. It was about a foreign man accused of killing a young Nigerian woman in her own home, and as evidence mounted, it became clear which story the court would believe. All crimes reaches a point of verdict, and on March 21, 2024, Kano's High Court gave its answer. Judge Sanusi Ado-Ma'aji declared that the state had proved its case beyond reasonable doubt. He dismissed Frank's claim of self-defense, calling his testimony inconsistent with the facts. The stabbing, the forced entry, the blood on the floor, it all pointed to one conclusion: murder with intent. The punishment was the hardest under the Nigerian law: death by hanging. In the crowded courtroom, gasps and murmurs filled the air as Frank stood motionless, listening to his fate. Outside, journalists broadcasted the judgment, and the Attorney General of Kano announced that the ruling showed foreigners were not above Nigerian law. Frank's lawyer quickly noted their right to appeal, and many knew the case would continue in higher courts. But for Umita's family, the day brought a measure of closure. For society, it was a reminder that the law, though slow, had teeth. And at the end of every case, justice is not always as simple as a sentence. Because in Nigeria, death penalties are common on paper but rarely carried out. Governors must sign the execution warrants, and many hesitate. You see, Frank had the right to appeal, and his journey through the Court of Appeal, perhaps the Supreme Court, could stretch out for years. Yet in the eyes of many Nigerians, justice had been served the moment the gavel declared him guilty. For Umita's family, nothing could restore their daughter, but the conviction gave her memory dignity. For Kano State, the case sent a clear message: love cannot excuse violence, and no foreign passport can shield a killer from the law. Still, the tragedy left haunting echoes. A man who came seeking for opportunities ended up condemned to death. A young woman full of promises became a symbol of lost potential. A city that thrives in trade and cultural exchange was now scarred by a crime born of obsession. And as her memory lingers in Kano's night air, the story of Umita and Frank remains a lesson about where unchecked passion can lead.